Would you like to take a seat? I'm going to invite, call him the Reverend James Stevenson to join me on stage. Yeah. You can, so we have to have, oh, thank you, Tom. We have to have props. So when we record this, we like to pretend that, I don't know, why do we'd like to pretend we're in a coffee shop, so we put a table here, which normally has notes in front of it, James, but this morning doesn't. I'm going to get a Bible. Right, James, tell everybody, introduce yourself if anybody doesn't know you, and then tell everybody what we're talking about.
Morning, everyone. I'm James. If we've not met, it's lovely to be with you this morning. What happens in the week before this is that he's nervous until about Saturday lunchtime, and I'm really relaxed, and then we switch. I don't sleep, check the news, think, what on earth are we going to be doing? And then this happens. So we get to a point where people have shared different possibilities. So we've had lots this morning, which is great. So thank you for engaging with us. I'm not going to mention all of the ones that we've had, but a few people have requested a reflection on the Netflix drama Adolescence. I've not watched it, so we'll do that when I've watched it, because I've spent too much of my life talking about things I don't know anything about, and not willing to do that in front of people on a Sunday morning. And then we've had a couple of people ask questions about whether the Archbishop of Canterbury can forgive John Smythe. I think the one that we're going to kind of land on is how we can, what it's like to be Christians in a world that is politically mad.
Okay.
Politically and economically mad, potentially, as well. But I'm no economist, so I'm already straying into territory that I'm not qualified to speak on.
Do we very, very just quickly knock the forgiveness thing on the head, like in a sentence?
Yeah.
So in a sentence, to offer forgiveness is something that you do in response to a harm that's been done to you. Jesus offers forgiveness for sins to the leper, to the guy who's lowered through the roof in Mark chapter 2, causes a whole furore because the ultimate forgiveness is about that, and who can forgive sins but God alone. And then he goes and he heals the leper. And the point of Christian forgiveness is that when we forgive somebody, we aren't saying it doesn't matter, actually. We are handing that person over to the love, the mercy, and the justice of God. So we are freeing ourselves from the responsibility to have to get even or to have to do justice, how we would see it in our own fallen state. And we are saying, I entrust this person into the hands of the one who is love and who is justice, and will see all things right. So that's the point of Christian forgiveness. And I can't, if somebody here hits James, I can't forgive you. I can't forgive you for hitting James. Only he can forgive you for hitting him. And in doing so, he hands you over to the eternal God of love and justice. So that's my one take on how we as Christians forgive.
So that's an example of a 90-second to 2-minute answer. Every term that Alpha has done, we invite our guests on Alpha to throw questions into this setting, and we answer whatever questions they have in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, which is a bit of a challenge when you get big questions. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay,
right.
So what does it mean? How can we be Christian in a world where it's politically mad? So culture, theology, life. We've got a Bible in front of us. Whenever we do this, we slightly wince because we're trained as Anglicans and we want there to be a reading of Scripture. So we'll make sure that there's a bit of Scripture read out during this.
Okay. So are you going to start?
Yeah. So if you hadn't noticed, the world's gone slightly mad. We have 3 really powerful nations that have leaders who are intent on their self-interest as people and as nations. So it's not just, servant-hearted people protecting their nations. From what we can tell in terms of China, Russia, and the United States of America, we've got 3 leaders of global superpowers who are interested in themselves and their nations prospering at the expense of others.
I think it's worth. So culturally, we live in a very interconnected world. Looking around the room, I know, talking to a lot of you, you work in industries or you work in fields where actually what you do is either sold or is bought from or is impacted with other nations. And that's something that is only that's always been the way of nations, trade. And it is only something that's kind of increased as technology has increased. So I think the tipping point behind this is probably everybody thinks about Trump and his tariffs. The first thing to say is that tariffs aren't anything new. There were tariffs before Trump stood up. He just kind of raised a whole load of them. I'm not an economist, but my understanding is that generally tariffs are seen as a bad thing. So if you've ever seen the film Ferris Bueller's Day Off, there's that scene where the guy's going, he's doing that to anybody, and he goes, tariffs, did they work? Anybody? No, they didn't. And high tariffs, there's a whole kind of story about why they don't work. But what we tend to do is if we sit here in England, we go, Trump's put tariffs, they must be bad. What we don't understand then is we don't understand maybe the heart behind why they've done it. And that's always one of the things you've got to reflect on culturally. So why might you bring in tariffs? You might bring in tariffs because you want to protect an industry that is really vital in a part of your country where actually if you are importing from another country, whole sectors of your country, people will lose all their jobs. You might want to protect an industry that actually is quite, it's useful to protect because actually if the world did go to war, you don't want to be buying stuff from another country, you need to be making it internally. You might want to protect an industry that you're trying to grow so that it can then take its part in the whole worldwide economy, and you might bring in tariffs for a time. There's a whole load of interest. You might want to bring in tariffs to protect your nation and your way of life. And in a global world, you might think we're losing what it is to be nation X and nation Y. If we bring in tariffs, it'll help us do that. So there are whole communities, especially if you think about America and the Deep South, where basically without that factory or without that Air Force base or whatever, that whole city doesn't exist. So we sit here and we go, they must be mad. You might do, you might not, but actually you need to sometimes see that there are decisions that are being taken for reasons. And throughout the whole of human history, nations have generally been self-interested. And if you think yours hasn't, and you probably like me might not be from the UK, every nation at its own core has a level of self-interest.
But the difference here, I think, is that there's a sense in which there's a volatility to the world at the moment that we haven't experienced for a few decades. Yeah. So if you think of, if you like the artist Sting, he may be well past your sell-by date. He wrote a song 30, 40 years ago called Russians in Europe and America, there's a growing feeling of hysteria. There isn't a monopoly of common sense on either side of the political fence, some of the lyrics from that song. And so
you going to sing it?
No. Different range. So there's a sense in which if we go back 20, 25 years, those global superpowers still existed, but with the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a kind of, how does this feel? I don't think there was a question about whether Bush was a narcissist. I think there was a question as to whether he was able to take the right, wise action in response to 9/11. I think the issue here is that we're looking at it thinking, oh my goodness, we've got three global superpowers who appear to be run by narcissists. And there's wars happening around that. And so that just raises the level of anxiety, and therefore what does it mean for us to be Christians in that setting? I think that's where we're kind of going underneath this.
And it's interesting that culturally, I think we are at the end of a period where it's actually it's not normal to presume that your leaders lead a nation for your interest. That actually throughout human history has not been normal. So somebody who we reference an awful lot in this podcast is a guy called Tom Holland, who wrote a book called Dominion, and his journey into writing that book was he thought we were inheritors of Greek and Roman culture and Greek and Roman values and ideals, and then realized that they were incredibly self-interested and incredibly cruel to the vulnerable and to the other. And then went, well, where did this idea that we should serve one another, love one another, it came from Christians. So actually, there is a sense that through most of human history, leaders are out for themselves. Famously, the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette said, we'll let them eat cake. She had no concept of what it was to be like a peasant in France. If they don't have any bread, they can eat cake. Because actually, these people are like living in their kind of ivory towers, kind of living for themselves, and seeking to use their populace for their own reasons. That's kind of normal human history.
So we're in the middle of this volatile world, and we're Christians, and we believe that we know the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So how do we live as people who know the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords within a world where somebody's decisions that are made thousands of miles away from us can land on our doorstep and can have quite a dramatic effect on the way that we live our lives? So, there'll be people who will be questioning whether their business is viable. There'll be people who will have relocated across continents because of decisions that are being made, whether they're aware of those or not. How many people have been made refugees by militias who've been armed by one of those governments?
So the thing that this opens up, I'm thinking out loud here, James, is that moments like this make us realize that we're not really in charge of our own life. Charles Taylor, who's a Catholic philosopher, writes about how in the West we try and create the buffered self. And the idea of the buffer is it protects me from you and from everybody else. And moments like this realize that the buffered self is an illusion, that we're not actually in charge of our own lives, and that other people can make decisions that have an effect on our life that we can't do anything about. So when I was 14, I walked into history class at the start of the school in September, and I was going to sit next to Keelan Reynolds because I always sat next to Keelan Reynolds. And if you were a teacher, you did not want Massey and Reynolds sat next to each other. So we walked in and we sat next to each other, and the teacher said, "Massey, come and sit at the front. You're at the front for the rest of the year." And at that stage, I thought the journey from September through to June was like, that felt like forever. And a decision was taken that would affect my experience of history for a whole year. Cool. But that's normal human experience, is that people take decisions and we can't do anything about them. And this is, so it's like, so even though you talk up there, like with a Putin and a Trump, actually some of you are going to go into the office tomorrow and someone's going to say, that thing I needed by Wednesday, I need it today. It just happens all the time.
Okay, so when we think of, that's culture, when we think about theology, we're just going to do a couple of things. We're going to go to the Old Testament and we're going to go to the New Testament. I've lined up a couple of passages. We're now going to arm wrestle over whether I get to pick both passages or whether Wayne's going to pick both.
But I haven't lined up any, so you can pick both.
Okay, so I think we're going to we'll go to Lamentations, which is after Jeremiah. It's the story of the people who are left in Jerusalem after pretty much everyone else has been taken off into exile in either Syria or Babylon. And it's a really brutal account. Don't read it unless you're aware of the fact that it's probably got an 18 certificate on it. It's a really brutal account of what it's like for people to live under siege for a long time. And in the middle of it, in the very, very middle verse, there's a kind of a declaration about the nature of God and his goodness. I think it's chapter 3, verse 23. Is that right?
Keep talking, I'll look it up.
Flannel. And basically it's a recognition of this very thing, that in the midst of the global superpowers of the time, so Egypt and Babylon and Syria having kind of on its way out a little bit, and these people who are left totally vulnerable, beaten like to a pulp, basically, they can still call on the goodness of God in the midst of it. Are you there?
Yeah.
I think it's verse, it's either, verse 22, 23 and 24. In the midst of all of this, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They're new every morning, great is your faithfulness. So you might be familiar with that from hymns or from things that people say. The merciful goodness of the Lord endures, his mercies are new every morning. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. So, when you sing, is it shouts that you are my portion, deliverer? Those kind of lyrics come from people who are in the midst of essentially societal torture about 2,600 years ago. And they're calling on the goodness of God in the midst of that. So that's one place to go, to say, actually, we've seen people do this before. God can be a stronghold for people. He can be a very present help in times of trouble. He's done that before. He can do it again. So when we feel anxious, troubled in a volatile world, we can know that God is with us and will help us in the midst of all of that.
You said you had two?
Yeah, so how then can we do that? Because we know that it isn't always, it doesn't always come naturally to us. Well, we go to the Jesus, because he's a good person to go to, right?
Yes.
So if you're, I would encourage you around this time of year as a Christian to be reading one of the Passion narratives. So that's a term for the passages in the Gospels where Jesus is arrested, trialed, and then executed on the cross. Because it's just really good to have that alongside whatever else you are reading. So, you might be in Exodus, but around this time of year, heading towards Easter, it's just good to be coming to grips with what happens to Jesus in those last hours. And in John's Gospel, you've got, in chapters 18 and 19, you've got him being put under arrest by the chief priests and guards, and then a jumped-up trial. But all the way through, Jesus is totally surrendered to the will of God. So when they're asked, when comments are made, he basically says, any power you have is given to you by my Father in heaven. And so he's totally surrendered to the will of the Father, but also in control of the whole thing. So at any moment he can walk away and escape, but he decides to go through what it is that the Father has purposed in those settings. So we can know, because Jesus is content to trust the Father and to endure the suffering of the cross, that he who is risen from the dead can be at work in us. And that same Jesus who can trust God even in the most difficult circumstances is inside us and can lead us through those moments.
So if let's kind of like track back. So actually the first thing is, like, when you read the news is, it says in the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun, that actually, that this is how it's always been throughout all of history since the fall. That because as human beings, we've broken our relationship with God. We're driven by fear, and we're driven by fear that we're not known, and that we don't know who we are. And so we try and create names for ourselves. We try and build an identity, and we try and build security. And the only way we can do that is by putting ourselves over and above the others. We do that as individuals, and we do that as communities, and we do that as nations. When I, a very long time ago, studied history at an undergraduate level, before I got to university, we were all told we had to read a book called The Rise and the Fall of the Great Powers. We all had to arrive at university having read this book, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. And so actually, we know that, like, powers rise and fall. It's a quirk in history that the British Empire rose above the Dutch one, because they did a deal when there was a royal marriage that said for every navy ship the Dutch built, they would build the British too, and then the Dutch were like about 100 years later going, oh, why did we build the British a massive navy? And the British were then, and so actually nations rise, nations fall, leaders come and leaders go. And when we read this book, we see that that's the case. And the reason that happens is because we live in this fallen world where we've all turned in on ourselves. And we are all trying to make a name for ourselves. And so it's very easy to put the leader, whether it be the person at the front of the classroom, the person in the biggest office in your company, or the person who's running the free world, so-called, and to put them up there and go, I wouldn't be like that. And it's very, very easy to do that. And Rowan Williams said about the MP scandal when they were all claiming money for duck houses, he said the reason we're so cross is deep down inside we know we might be a little bit the same, but we just get to take pens from the office cupboard, not second homes, but actually it's the human heart. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is we can't get out of it. That's what James was saying when he went to Jesus. We can't get out of this. And so we need somebody who enters into our story who is completely other-obsessed, whose life is not turned inward on himself, but turned outwards towards you and me. And then the point, like as you travel through the Easter story, you will see Jesus again and again and again encounter others who have their own interests at heart. Judas, Peter in the garden, Caiaphas, Pilate, again and again, people who are basically trying to work out how I can get through this for me. And in the middle of this story is this Jesus who is for them and is for you and not for himself.
So when it comes to life, you and I know that things happen. We know each other's triggers, don't we? Try not to press them too much. But there's stuff for us in this, isn't there? You know, about how we respond to the moments in our life that are the kind of the growth moments. So Jesus is in front of Pilate, and Pilate says the thing that if I were Jesus would completely wind me up. I mean, for lots of reasons, it's good that I'm not Jesus. But when Pilate says to him, "What is truth?" And Jesus is the one who has come full of grace and truth, Jesus just is silent. And then Pilate asks him, "Do you not know that I have power too?" And Jesus says, at that point, any power that you have is given to you. And so it's the only point at which Jesus speaks. He speaks really calmly and points to the Father. He isn't insecure in himself. He doesn't say, you know, I would say, "Do you not know that I'm the truth?" And because Jesus is entirely secure in his status, he doesn't respond to that question. He doesn't feel the need to correct Pilate. And so there's something, I think, for all of us in these moments where what is being played out on a global scale just comes in and it pushes our buttons. It triggers us. The stuff that's there for us just comes to the surface, and there's a moment there for us. We've done culture, we've done theology, we're heading into life around actually how do we respond in those moments. And I think some of it I've been seeing in my own life is about in recent months is about repenting of the lies that I believe about myself, repenting of the lies I believe about the world, and replacing it with the truths and the grace of Jesus, so that when those moments come, I'm responding out of a renewed heart and mind rather than out of an old heart and mind that hasn't been changed by Jesus.
So Jesus comes, dies in our place. So he takes, this is Easter 101, he takes the punishment for our sin, he takes the virus of sin upon himself, and he defeats it. And he rises to new life, proving that he's defeated it, and he offers us all life in him. And that is life in the Spirit, which is life in the kingdom of God, which is life living, which is this side of eternity, is the invitation to grow with him and living a life that is for others and that is with him. And then he calls us to live in this world that is waiting for him to come back. And so if you were to read on in Lamentations, James, it says, "The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him." In the West, we think that means if the Lord is good to me, it means I'll get what I want, as opposed to the bigger picture. And then it says this, "It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." And that's the one thing, in the midst of all of the stuff of life, it's the one thing that we need to remember is the salvation of the Lord in the bigger picture. So when I was put to the front of the history class, you know, my life was pretty much over. But now I look back, you know, and that actually my life wasn't over then. And the next year when I got dropped from the rugby team, you know, my life had ended. And actually I look back and I go, oh, it hadn't ended then. You know, actually, I don't know how many times in life I've thought, this is it, my life is pretty much done now. And I look back and I go, oh, and you get to my stage in life, you're going to get the bigger picture, and you see stuff in their right context. And there's a wonderful writer who writes about the Christian life as a play. And there are 5 acts in it. So there's Act 1, which is the Old Testament. Act 2, which is the Gospels. Act 3, which is the story of the early church. And Act 5, which is the end of the book, when Jesus returns and all things are made good. And we will be with him forever. And there will be no more tears. And there will just be joy. And the writer says that we are in Act 4. And our job in Act 4 is to live full of the Spirit that is poured out in Act 3. For the life that we know is coming in Act 5. And our job is to, the phrase that is used by theologians is to perform the scriptures, but to live the Christian life out in such a way that Acts 1, 2, and 3, and 5 make sense. It's easier said than done, because actually quite often in life someone comes and pulls the rug out from under us. But in those moments we are anchored between 1, 2 and 3 and 5. And we can look back and we can look forward and we can look up and ask for the Spirit, and then go, now in the light of having the rug pulled out for me, this is what I'm going to do. Not my own, but with him and with you. And so that's how we respond in a life where I'm not in charge, but actually that's it. I'm not in charge. He is. Now what's he up to?
So really specifically, let me give you an example. So my dad died in 2011, and in the years after that, I really, really struggled when anyone in authority in the Church of England asked for a meeting with me. My dad had been in authority in the Church of England. He'd been a bishop. And it was as if, basically, my cover had gone. And I would panic. And I would kind of, underneath it all, I would be thinking, what's this meeting going to be about? What are they going to say? What have I done wrong? And all of that stuff in me that used to be covered by my dad's kind of affirmation of me, just suddenly just came up to the surface. And I had to find a way to deal with that, because it was actually preventing me from doing my job. And part of it was recognizing it, and then it was kind of repenting of it, and kind of handing it over to God and saying, actually, this is something I didn't even realize was there about me until this thing changed. And now I don't want to live out of that. I want to live out of what it means to be renewed in you. And so I had to find a new way of understanding what it meant to derive security from family and from God. And I'm still on that journey. But what we're driving at here is, actually, when it comes to this stuff, it's all very well talking about the madness of the world politically. But unless we're, as Christians, thinking about, well, what's this exposing in my life, then we're not going to grow into more of the likeness of God. We're just going to be pointing the finger at other leaders who are not doing their job well. So always, always, always in these kind of scenarios, we're saying, Lord, what is it? What is it in my life that you're just bringing up? That what's in my reaction to this? What noises am I making? What am I saying that's different to the ways that other people are reacting to this? That means that I can see, God, what you're allowing this thing to happen in your sovereignty. But in my life, what are you doing in me that I need to repent of to allow your freedom to come?